Hey everyone, it's the Kung Fu Genius, aka Alex Richter. If you're listening to us on audio only, I'd appreciate you reviewing and rating the podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you're watching us on YouTube, of course, if you like what I do here, don't forget to subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius and hit that bell for notifications. I have an announcement for Kung Fu Genius fans. Right now, for a limited time, you can get a 1-month all-access trial subscription to Wing Chun Illustrated magazine absolutely free. No strings attached after that free month either. Go to WCInewsstand.com to register in the upper right corner. Fill in your email and password and use the code KFG trial to get 1 month free access to all the issues published from 2011 to the current issue. How cool is that? All the issues. And if you want that information again, it's in the description below. And with that, let's get started.
All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be discussing his first year teaching in NYC. Lots of East Coast, lots of nonsense, lots of Taoist magic. Let's get to it.
He is unstoppable, unbeatable, unbelievable. He's Alex Richter, the Kung Fu Genius.
And every day, I practice martial arts. Watch out! Word is, I'm a Kung Fu genius. Practiced all day like a genius.
All right, Dre, man, how you doing?
I am Gucci, Sifu. Let's get into it.
So we're doing another episode where I have to, unfortunately, talk about myself. So apparently people really like that castle stories thing, so people have been asking for other stories. Yeah, so...
Who knew?
Yeah, so this time I'm going to tell the, I guess, the adventure that was my first year teaching here in New York City, which was pretty wild.
And I understand that was a tumultuous year.
Yes. So, yeah, it was crazy because when I started teaching, I was qualified first level technician in Wing Chun, which doesn't mean anything in terms of knowing how to run a school and how to run a business, right? It's one thing to know...
You think you know it all.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to know how to punch and kick and do Wing Chun and all that kind of stuff, and it's quite something else to be able to run a school. And, you know, originally I didn't even want to teach in New York City. I wanted to teach in Miami, right? Go to my kind of, you know, I'm half Cuban, want to go to my roots. I hate cold weather. And so I was thinking of, while I was in Germany during that time at the castle, in the back of my mind, when I came back, I was going to go to Miami and open my school over there. But then something crazy happened. Right after 9/11, in fact, it was the week of 9/11. Sifu Jai was in Germany at that time. He was teaching seminars. I remember it was a super weird week because he was in Germany teaching seminars. That whole thing happened. Being a New Yorker, living in Germany, having to watch that stuff on TV. It was totally crazy. And about a week after that, Sifu Jai was in Berlin teaching a seminar.
Okay.
And me and my buddies, we drove up to Berlin to go to the seminar and see him. And that was, although I had been to a number of seminars with him, I never really interacted with him too much because you have to understand in Germany, when he taught a seminar, there'd be like a few hundred people there. I mean, smaller if it was instructor only, but like there'd be tons of people there at a seminar. So
yeah, I can imagine.
You didn't really necessarily have the chance to get any kind of like FaceTime with him or whatever. But I remember this seminar was in the school of Sifu Klaus Schildert. So it was
Klaus Schilder.
Yeah, it was in a Berlin Wing Chun school. So it wasn't like in a big auditorium, or it was like in someone's school.
Okay.
And I was there, and it was also simultaneous. It was the night I first had a chance to do Chi Sao with him and do Pun Sao with him, which was with Sifu Jai, yeah.
Ooh.
And then after that, I told him, I said that, you know, that I was from New York and I was kind of entering the last 7 months of my training in Germany, and that I was looking at the end, you know, in the summertime of the next year of 2002 to go back to the States and start teaching in Miami. And then he asked me, you know, if I was from Miami. He said, well, I'm actually from New York. And then he told me that, well, why don't you teach in New York? Because at that time, a few months earlier, Sifu Emin had left the association. And Sifu Emin was the former head instructor of the U.S.
At the right time.
And the New York school, which doesn't exist anymore, they stayed with Emin. So that meant like the New York WT representative was no longer part of Sifu Jai's organization. So he wanted to have someone in like a major city like New York. So basically he just said, why don't you teach in New York instead? And then I remember he said, I'll make you the head man of New York, which is like... All I did when I came back was I opened a school in New York and I paid the same fee as everyone else. I never once was the head, although he like promised me.
Make a big announcement.
Yeah.
Behind a podium.
That was like one of the things he tells you to get you excited, right? And I was thinking, wow, the head man. First of all, it's, you know, you normally would say chief instructor or regional director of New York, but in like the Sifu Jai universe, he used words like head man. You are the head man of New York. So I'm like,
Headmaster.
I'm like head man, right? And I'm like, I'm the head man of New York, right? And of course that went to my head, right? Because it was like a nobody
Straight
learning
to the head, yeah.
learning Wing Chun in Germany, and then I'm like, I am the head man of New York City, right? So basically, just based on that suggestion, I decided, fine, I'll teach in New York and not in Miami. So basically, pretty much it was his suggestion why I decided to not to teach in a totally different place. So that, that was kind of like, that was the setup back then. So I still had about another 7 months or so. No, a little bit more than that. It was September. I didn't go back. I guess almost a year. I went back. I finished training in June of 2002 in Germany.
Okay.
Like somewhere the middle of the month. And then I went back to the States. And by July 1st, the first week, maybe not July, but I remember the first week of July, I started teaching my first class in New York. I didn't even wait, which was kind of,
Whoa.
It shows you how blissfully unprepared I was, because I didn't even think about having a business plan.
Right,
How am I going to
right.
do this? I was like, screw it. And also you have to imagine that at that time, because Sifu Imin had left the association prior, so there was a bit of a schism in Sifu Leung-Ting's organization. You had the people who stayed with Imin, and then the people who wanted to stay with Sifu Leung-Ting, right? And I remember at the castle, this was a big deal, because it meant that in the States, Sifu Leung-Ting was now going to take over teaching instructors in the U.S., where previously it was Sifu Imin. So for me, everyone was like, oh, I got to learn in Germany at the castle from all these guys, and now I'm going to go back to the States, and I'm going to get to learn directly from Sifu Leung-Ting instead of from, Sifu Imin, one of my Sihings or whatever, right?
Timing,
So
I love it.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I was also super excited. I remember Sifu Bant told me, probably the last week I was at the castle, he said, this is going to be a huge change in your Wing Chun career. He goes,
What?
Yeah, and he was very clear about that. He
Supportive,
says,
right?
you're gonna start learning from Sifu Leung-Ting and from these other Hong Kong instructors, because it was also announced at that time that Sifu Carson Lau would be coming to North America, because he was still in Hong Kong at that time. And it was like, wow, I was going to have a chance to learn from Sifu Leung-Ting and Sifu Carson Lau and all this kind of stuff. And even Sifu Bant was like, this is going to be a huge opportunity for you. So I was super excited. And
you're what, 22?
No, 23, 24,
23,
something. It's around that time, yeah. Around 20, I think it was
God,
20,
my head
about
would've
24.
Exploded.
Yeah, my head was almost exploding the whole time, right? And so I created kind of a page for my upcoming school in New York. Mm-hmm. And I even had an email address or something ready to go. And
Webpage, right?
Yeah, and I contacted the new U.S. chief instructors for the U.S. and told them my intention, everything like that. So I created this website. And shortly before I left Germany, I had something like 150 emails from people who were like, oh, I'm so happy that real Wing Chun is going to come to New York now and all this kind of stuff.
You already had people pre-ordering.
Yeah, basically, the register, they wanted to come to my class, right? Well, here's the thing. I didn't know anything about business. I didn't know anything about signing anyone up. And one thing you learn very quickly in the martial arts world is that it's full of people who are high on enthusiasm, but low on actual drive to get out of their house and do something, right? So in my mind, I thought whoa, look at all these emails I got. All these people want to learn.
Full school.
Yeah, it was like, I'm going to start, I'm going to, hit the ground with the wheels spinning already, right?
Right.
And so I very quickly, I got back to New York, maybe the middle of June, something like that. And I found a dance studio here in Midtown, because I was just like, all right, let me just get a place where I can teach hourly, right? A couple times, get a couple students. And once I get a couple students, then maybe I get another location. Eventually I get my own, right? That was always, it ended up being exactly kind of how I ended up doing it, but I did it really very willy-nilly. I just wanted to start teaching. And I also thought, because I had all these people who were ready to do it, that I shouldn't waste any time, right? So anyway, I get back.
Great.
I remember the place I first started teaching was a place, I think it was on 7th Avenue, Midtown. It was called Shetler Studios, like a dance studio,
Holy Shetler.
They rented for rehearsal and dance and stuff. And I remember the room I had even had I think 7th Avenue, but in the 40s somewhere, maybe in the 50s. I don't remember. I don't even know if it's still around. Might be Shetler Studios. You can look it up. So I started teaching it, but the problem was they had a space for me to teach on Tuesday, and I wanted to teach Tuesday, Thursday at the same time, but they had a space on Tuesday, but not a space on Thursday. And then so I had to find another dance studio to teach on Thursday, right? And then, of course, I didn't know what I was doing, right?
Yeah.
And then it was like this thing I had to like email every week, like, okay, this week on Tuesday, we're going to be here. And on Thursday, we're going to be there.
Ooh.
Like something that would never really fly. But the funny thing was, at first, it kind of worked because those people who came to me at the beginning, they really wanted to learn WT. So they were a little bit more enthusiastic than just, say, the normal person who's interested in signing up for martial art classes but doesn't know you next to the guy who teaches Kenjutsu or whatever. You know what I mean? So anyway, I had all these emails lined up. I told everyone, like, hey, I'm going to start teaching first week of June. Here's my location. Everything you guys can show up, right? And I was thinking, like, this is going to be huge. I teach my first class. 2 people show up, right? And I was like, you know, and as I mentioned before, like I mentioned this in the theory class I taught over the weekend, right? Sifu Jai later, I mean, obviously I just started teaching. I had not had super amount of contact with him at that point. But he was very big on like, hey, your first generation, these guys need to be fighters. So basically that kind of...
I love that advice too.
The old Yip Man template, right? Like the first generation, you train those guys as fighters because that's the generation that's going to establish your reputation, supposedly. Because, you know, we're going to be answering challenge fights every week or whatever, right? And then, you know, and then...
prepping you for these dudes coming in.
And then once you're established... Then, of course, then you don't have to worry about having so many fighters because, you know, now you have your fighters, your reputation established, and you can teach Wing Chun, you know, in any way you want, right? And not everyone who comes into your school needs to be a fighter. Once you already have a reputation for school, people can come to your school because they just want to do it for fun, right? But at the beginning, it's like, you know, at least in the Chinese perspective, very big that you know, trained up a bunch of fighters, right? So that first day that I taught, 2 people show up. One was this super dainty Bulgarian girl. And she talked like this.
Yeah,
Kind of
like
Hooks
yes.
from Police Academy. Right? It was exactly like Hooks.
Shout out to Hooks, wherever you at. Love
and
Hooks.
so, like, you know, and you could barely hear her when she talked. And then so I had her, and then I had this other guy, his name was Ray. And Ray was like maybe about 6 feet tall.
He was high tower.
And maybe a little bit. But he was just like kind of this blocky shouldered guy with super thick glasses that made his eyes look really small. And he had like, he reminded me a little bit of, and I mean this in a loving way because I love the dude. He reminded me of Beaker from the Muppets. All right? Like because he would just kind of stand there like this and he'd be like,
yo.
And he had almost no reaction. You'd show something and he'd be like, wow. So I had no idea. These were my 2 first students.
Kind of like Bowfinger.
Yeah. And like, so when I saw it, I was like, okay, so I was happy that somebody showed up. Yeah. I thought a lot more people were going to show up. Now, of course, in the years since, I've learned how to do business, right? So I realized like all the rookie mistakes I made in that there. But anyway, they showed up and they ended up, you know, training with me for a while and they ended up actually getting quick. In fact, Ray, the dude, he had a nickname. His nickname was The Wall because nobody could knock him down. Later, he would hold the kick shield for even my biggest students. And like they would try kick him and they would fall down, right? Like nobody could move him, right? It was totally crazy. And so, but it was annoying for me because I didn't really have a permanent location. It was like on Tuesday I'd be in Midtown, and then on a Thursday I would be like in Chelsea or whatever, right? So it was really difficult. But for better or worse, I had a Wing Chun class going on. And
you had some commitment.
Yeah, it was a huge learning curve for me because, you know, also think about it, it was 2002. New York has a rich martial arts history. And especially in Chinese Kung Fu. So like in the Chinese Kung Fu hierarchy, I'm like, at that point, I'm like the low man on the totem pole, you know what I mean? And so I had to do a little bit of research to find out like, who are the people who are like really established here in New York? And that's when, you know, we go down to Chinatown to BLT, the old martial arts store down there, which has been around for a hot minute.
Yes.
There was also the smaller shop, BLP, which is still around.
Okay.
And then here on 6th Avenue, there's they're called New Hope, but they used to have a different name back then. I forget what the name was, but I remember they got in trouble because they sold like some knife or some illegal weapon or whatever, and then the city wanted to shut them down, and then they just changed the business name the next day and they stayed in business, right? But they like, I don't know, they were selling like, I don't know, nunchucks with blades on them or something, right? What? I'm just kidding. I don't know what it was, but like, you know, and so I started to find out, okay, these are the martial arts stores, and started finding out about like, who are the OGs of the Kung Fu scene in New York City. And you have like, obviously you have Wai Hong, who taught Fu Jiao Pai, the Black Tiger style. These are like the guys who were teaching back in the day, who had the big schools
since
in
the 70s.
In the 70s. And these are the guys who are around, and Sam Leung from Eagle Claw, who later Cynthia Rothrock learned from. And obviously then you had people like Paul Ko, Sifu Paul Ko, who's still around, the Bo Law Kung Fu school, which is down in Chinatown. That guy's been around. And, you know, I always really liked Paul Ko because his marketing, the way he does everything, like he's got a really, really good presentation, and he's always someone like a really respected in the Chinese Kung Fu world here in New York City. So there were like a lot of people who are very well established, and I was like a skinny neck kid starting to teach Wing Chun in New York City, right? And so
skinny neck status.
Yeah, so I had like a lot to learn about like, you know, kind of what's what and everything like that. But I was pretty confident in my skills, and I was learning on the job in terms of how to run like a school. Yeah. So that was kind of like where I was at like at that time. And of course, within Wing Chun, you also had some established people here too. You had like Sifu Moyat, obviously, was one of the first guys to teach Wing Chun here in New York City, and direct and very close student of Sifu Yip-Man. But even at that time, Moyat had passed away, I think, in 2000. So when I started teaching, he had already passed away for 2 years, right? So it's mostly his own students and his sons who are teaching here, right? But there was like a very well-established, lineage of Moyat Wing Chun here in New York, as well as Jason Lau and a few other people that were around. And I was, there'd been some Leung Teng Wing Chun in New York, but never with the same kind of presence as the Moyat guys or Jason Lau's guys or whatever. So I really felt like I was the first one who was really trying to establish a big branch in the WT branch in lineage in New York. And so at that time, I also had a very small class in Connecticut because my parents lived out there at that time. So they had like a big basement, and I converted the basement into a private training gym. So I had a wooden dummy down there and heavy bags and wall bags. And that's where I started teaching like your Sihings, like the Leung brothers, and had a bunch of students who had previous martial arts background. And I had black belts, and I had all sorts of stuff, right? And so like, it was a cool time then, but my main focus was New York. Yeah. So like, I'm teaching, it's like, it's difficult to find footing. And then I found a place called Chow's Martial Arts Center. Now, Chow's Martial Arts Center, I don't know if they're still around. I think they changed their name to Fight House because they got in trouble too. They were hosting like illegal Thai boxing matches without like a state license. And the state came and shut them down. How big is this place? This place was huge, man. So when I was there, they used to be down, I think it was on 25th Street. And then they changed locations. It was this huge, like multi-thousand square foot space. And it was Chinese martial arts style. So they had like a pro shop in there with books and Kung Fu uniforms, all Kung Fu stuff you can buy, like a martial arts store in there. Yeah. And then they had multiple training rooms, one with a boxing ring, one grappling room, one had a wooden dummy. You had all the Kung Fu weapons. It looked like something out of a Shaw Brothers movie. The place was amazing. Whoa. And it was run by a lady named Peggy Chow. And she also taught a style of Kung Fu called Wu Mei. But she was very smart because she got this very big location. And then she would rent out to all these different martial arts people who needed a space, right? Like they didn't have enough students to get their own school, but they had like a place that was already equipped to teach. So I got a spot at Chow's Martial Arts Center. But as you can imagine, all the best spots were already taken. So I think I was teaching like Wednesday at like 8:45 p.m. or something. Like I had some rat ass time, right? But Peggy was always very nice to me. But the weird thing was there were a bunch of other Wing Chun people there. And that's when I started to get like the firsthand feel for like the weird vibes between the Wing Chun schools, right? Because for me, of course, I knew all about the politics, but I never had to experience it firsthand because I just did Wing Chun. I just got back from training Wing Chun full-time in Germany. Yeah. And I just cared about learning and getting better at Wing Chun. And then I would be like about to teach my class with my two not very physically imposing students, right? And they would be like these other Wing Chun schools that were maybe finishing teaching their classes or whatever. And I'd be in the changing room putting on my Leung Teng uniform, which is very trademark at that time. And these guys would see me, and it was like there was this weird thing.
Who is
like
this guy?
Yeah, but while they knew who I was, they knew I was from Leung Teng, right? Because you wear that uniform, you might as well have a bullseye on your head, right? But it was weird because they never wanted to like say hi or talk to me or anything like that. And I would like look at them and they would like look away. So like I would want to go up at like, I got this vibe like, oh no, I shouldn't like say hi to them or whatever. And I'd be changing in the locker room and they'd be like, when you're like in elementary school and you want someone to hear that you're talking about something they might be interested in, but you don't say it to them. So you talk kind of loud to make sure that person hears what you're saying. Okay. So then I'd be like changing. They'd be like, oh, my Sifu is the best Wing Chun Sifu ever. Like I trained with so many guys from so many systems.
With that tone?
Yeah. And I can't find his center. And he's the most untouchable dude in New York.
I can't find his center.
They would say all these things super loud, presumably so I would hear it and I don't know, feel intimidated or whatever. and I was just like, oh, this is the crap that everyone talks about on the internet. And I'm just like, I just want to do my thing, right? And so, and at that time, I also need to mention that, as you know, there'd historically been a beef between the Outtake School and the William Cheung School, right?
Yeah.
Which came to a head in 1986 when, Sifu Amin showed up to one of William Cheung's seminars in Cologne. And no, I'm not touching that one with an 11-foot Wing Chun long pole, all right?
No.
I'm only going to reference it in the abstract,
Keep
okay?
that for the Patreon.
But anyway, the problem is that it's assumed that if you're in the Outtake lineage, that you then have a certain opinion about that fight or about William Cheung or whatever. When and no disrespect to William Cheung, but I quite frankly don't care. I mean, in 1986, when that fight happened, I was 9 years old. I'd been doing martial arts for about a year. I was into Bruce Lee, I was into all that stuff. But you know what I really wanted to be in 1986? I wanted to be a ninja. Because I had just found Shokasugi, all right? So while these Wing Chun guys are fighting over all this kind of stuff there, I'm trying to learn how to climb a tree with claws. I'm not in that argument, okay? And then but you kind of inherit it by being either in WT or I assume in the William Cheung lineage, they probably also inherit some of that too, right?
Yes.
So there were they weren't direct students of William Cheung. There were people who had left William Cheung's, they had their own style, but they were originally from the William Cheung lineage, and they would come up to me and they would be like, if Amin really wanted to test the system, he should have fought my Sifu and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like,
they came up to you.
They
and
would come up
said
to me.
this.
They would come up to me trying to relitigate beef from the '80s, which I would be like, I don't know what you want me to say. I don't know what I don't. It was difficult for me to say, yo, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't mean disrespect. I don't to quote my good friend Brady, and pardon my French, I don't give a shit because I don't give a.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's literally the only way I can put it.
Okay.
Okay. So anyway, but then I started to get emails from people who claimed that they were from the William Cheung lineage. I got one I remember there was a time period, especially at the beginning, I got one email a week from these guys. And every week they were like, we're going to show up to your school. And I'm thinking haha, you don't even know where I'm going to be teaching next week because I don't even know where I'm going to be teaching next week. So good luck showing up to my school, right? I'm in a situation now week to week. I don't even know where I'm going to be, all right? Yeah, joke's on you. You're going to go to Shetler Studios and there's going to be some 5-year-old in a ballet salsa tutu or whatever. Right? Yeah. So good luck with that, right? But these things were super aggressive. They were going to show up to my school with a video camera, and they were going to beat me up, and all this guy. And it was every week from 2 or 3 different email accounts. Could have been the same person, probably was, but purportedly from the William Cheung lineage, and threatening massive amounts of bodily harm on me. And here's the thing: I never went on the internet and talked. I was never on those internet forums talking getting in any. I don't care. Yeah. Okay. Wow. But somehow my mere presence in New York City alerted these people and threatened them to get where I was literally receiving. They were borderline death threats.
Wow.
And so really nasty stuff. And so I didn't know how legit that stuff was. But there comes a point when someone sends you a threatening email once a week that they're going to show up next week, where after about 6 weeks you go, I don't think this guy's going to show up because it's every week. It's next week, every week. All right. So at some point I'm like, all right,
tired of waiting.
It is what it is. Right. So eventually, I don't know how I did. See, I took a lot of notes back then. I took notes on what I was teaching, what I was doing, who I was teaching. So I look at some of this old stuff, and I don't know how I came in contact with this guy, but there was a guy on 23rd Street. And the address was 69 West 23rd Street. Yeah. He taught Tai Chi, and he had a space on the 3rd floor. And he was renting it himself. I don't know how I came in contact with him. I don't know if I found him or he had an ad, or I don't know how. Maybe Craigslist. I don't even know if Craigslist existed back then. No idea. But somehow I found this guy, and he was like, hey, you can rent from me. I'll give you a regular time slot. And I have an actual space. It's a brick and mortar space, because it's his Tai Chi school on the 3rd floor. And I can teach there. And he only had a few students. So for him, it was helping him out because he had to pay rent as well, right? And I was like, wow, this is amazing. Because eventually I knew I wanted my own space, right? But this was the perfect setup because I didn't have to fight with the dance studios every week to get a space. And I didn't have to be at Chow's Martial Arts Center with a bunch of weird, vibey Wing Chun people going like, yo, man, no one can find my Sifu Center, bro. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, calm down, buddy. You know? And it's also funny in hindsight. Now we flash forward nearly 20 years and most of those people are all gone, right?
Yeah, most of
So, you know, apparently maybe someone did find someone's center. I have no idea, right?
The
so
next
anyway,
generation of them are still here, right?
yeah, who knows?
Still looking
but
for
but
the
like
center.
these guys, their whole thing was just always comparing with other people, right? And then you see like you don't develop yourself when you constantly have that mindset. You know, your entire mindset is fixated on what other people are doing and not what you are doing. And it's no wonder that many of those schools didn't last. I mean, look at, you can see the attitude of the instructor through the students that they produce. And if these are the students in the locker room having the posture because they see that there's an instructor from another style, then that shows you what the Sifu is probably feeding them day in and day out. And then you wonder, yeah, of course, the school like that is not going to survive because it's not about improving the students. It's about pushing an agenda. And that stuff only lasts for so long, right? So anyway, I now have a space on 23rd Street at this Tai Chi guy's place. And we'll just call him Glenn. That's not his name. He's still around.
Okay.
We'll just call him Glenn. All right? Yeah. Everything's cool with him, but, you know, I don't know how he feels about this old stuff, right? So anyway, I'm teaching, and I got a space twice a week. At that time, I already had maybe about 8 or 9 students. I had a student named Zach, who used to be an actor in Hollywood. And then like he did a scene with Chaz Palminteri. I remember I was super excited about that.
Which movie?
Some low budget movie. But the thing is that at that time, you know, I was new to New York. So like meeting people who are actors and stuff, that stuff was new to me. Now someone comes in and says they're an actor and I'm like, what restaurant do you work at? You know what I mean? Like just like back then it's like, oh my God, this guy's an actor, right? But Zach still to this day, he lives out, he moved out to LA, did more stuff, and you know, we're still in contact. So
nice.
And then another student, Victor Barrios, who you met at the 15-year anniversary. He's like one of the big C-hangs in New York. And so he's down in Florida now. So I have contact with a lot of these guys who started with me the first time. You know, at that time. And so now I had my own space. So I contacted one of my friends back in Germany from my time over there, who's a graphic designer. And I had him design a postcard flyer for me because I'm like, oh, I have a space now. And then I wanted him to put the address of that Tai Chi place that I was renting at, right? I'd
love to see that flyer.
So I might have it somewhere, right? And so he designed it for me, and it was, you know, it's when I look back at it, I totally cringe, right? Because, you know, we were all trying to look super technical. And so I did that picture where it's like I'm doing the lapsao with a grabbing hand and doing the lifting punch under the arm. And, you know, looking all like, looking all like a tough guy, my skinny neck, right? Like,
yeah, that was a cool move back in the
but I
day.
mean, but like, I look at it now and I'm like, who's looking at this skinny neck kid going like, oh yeah, that guy's a badass, right?
Oh,
and of course, it was this movement here, and we thought that movement was so cool because it's the under the arm lifting punch, right? And then the funny thing was that later, like when Sifu Jai first came to New York, I think I still had some of those OG flyers lying around. And he looked at it and he's like, what is this idiotic movement, right? He's like, this is so stupid. He goes, who taught you this? Did you learn this in Germany? This is idiotic, right? And the funny thing was, like, in the meantime, all right, you know, we thought that thing in Germany, we thought that was the coolest thing in the world. So I take this super cool looking photo. Sifu Jai looks at it, and I learned it probably from Sifu Band or something like that, right? And Sifu Jai looks at it, and he's just like, what is this trash? He goes, this is so easy to defend. This is so stupid. Why would you do this, right? Why don't you put another movement in there, right? Like a better looking movement, right? Man. And so, you know, like me, I thought it was the coolest thing, and then he just ripped me for having that. And I was like, oh. And then, of course, nowadays I realize, well, I mean, there's sometimes it might work, but it is actually super easy to defend.
There's a movie that they used it in, what's it, Alita Battle Angel.
Oh, yeah, I saw
that. And
it
made it look cool.
Yeah, it's a cool looking thing, but cool looking thing doesn't necessarily mean it works in fighting, right? But the gag is, he used to say, this is the dumbest thing in the world, right? And if you look at his original Wing Chun Kun book, his student Pa Mong Fun demonstrates that in the book. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, you remember that 80s drug commercial where the guy comes in with the pot to his son and he's like, who taught you how to do this stuff? I learned it by watching you, all right? Who taught you how to do the under the arm lifting punch with the left?
I saw it in your book,
I saw it in your book. So, you know, it was kind of like one of those things, right? Yeah. So anyway, like that was my first postcard, which I will come back to that in a moment, right? And so, you know, so for better or worse, I had a school. I think by September, October, I had about 10 paying students. So, you know, I mean, it isn't like crazy or anything like that, but it was something, right? And so, you know, I had like zero business acumen, but I was really learning on the spot, right? And at that time when I would get emails, because, you know, when you've worked the front desk, and sometimes you get these crazy emails like, you know, well, I mean, you get normal emails like, oh, what's the difference between WT and WC, Wing Chun or whatever. And nowadays, you know, when you actually know how to run a business, you're like, hey, you know what? That's a really great question. You know, and you might give them a short answer like, WT is the brand of Wing Chun that we do. And when you come in for your intro lesson, we can explain all those things to you, right? Yeah. You want people to come in so you can show them, right?
We'll show you, yeah.
But back then I didn't know that. It was like, make an appointment and have the person come in. Why? When I can spend 30 minutes answering all these queries and not get the guy's contact information, right? Like an idiot.
Give him an answer.
Yeah. So I got this series of emails from this guy. It was like, you know, do you teach real self-defense in Wing Chun? I'm like, yeah, we specialize in self-defense, and, you know, do you teach how to defend against, you know, street fighting attacks? And, you know, and he would answer and I would answer every email with like these long answers.
Wow.
And then he would always come back with like 5 more questions, you know, and like, yeah, but what if the guy's really bigger than you? And what if the guy knows this? And what if the guy knows that? Right. And I would answer and I would all this kind of stuff. Right. And then, you know, in your mind, you start to develop a picture of someone, right? So this guy's sending me all these emails, and clearly I can tell, like, the underlying tone in the email is this guy seems to be curious.
Okay.
You know, like, that's why he's asking questions. But there seems to be an undertone of, like, this guy's really fearful. So I'm thinking, like, maybe he was a victim of assault, or maybe something was going on. But I was not really used to this. I don't know, like, is this normal? Am I going to have to write this every time someone sends me an email? So eventually, this dude comes in. All right. And at that time, I just got a new student. His name was Carlos. He was a former semi-pro football player, like big Puerto Rican dude with a shaved head.
What
just
team?
Like,
You remember what team?
I don't remember, but he just like, and he also had like a Harley and stuff, you know.
I think I met Carlos.
Yeah, you probably did. He comes by every now and again. And he always threatens to come back to training.
Okay.
About every 5 years or so.
I'm going to be back.
He'll be like, hey, Sifu, man, I'm coming back and come back to training. All right, man, Carlos, see you later. 5 years later, comes in and says the same thing, right?
Shout out to my Sifu.
That's right. But anyway, you know, in those days, he was kind of that guy that Sifu Larrington said you should train at the beginning, have a couple tough guys there, you know.
Bruiser.
He was a bruiser, right? So anyway, I'm there, and this guy who had been writing me these long-ass emails finally comes in, right? And so the guy comes in, and I'm going to use Carlos to kind of like do my intro lesson or whatever, right? And the guy walks in, all right? And Dre, I shit thee not, this dude was nearly 7 feet tall. And he wasn't a wiry 7 feet tall. He wasn't like a bodybuilder. You know what I mean? He was like, imagine Mikey Deane's proportions, but 7 feet tall.
7 feet tall,
So
Mikey Deane.
He's not a skinny dude.
Yo.
He's not a Dre proportion 7 feet. He's like a Mikey Deane. And I look at this guy and I think, oh man. And it was so funny because one of my Sihings from Germany was there at that time, and he sat and he saw this guy and he goes, oh, and he's a very religious guy, right? And he said to me in German, he says, hey, Alex, there's a reason why the good Lord did not give us those bodies. He goes, we'd be in jail by now with our skills. I'm like, all right, it might be pushing it a little bit, right? But that's how we felt. Like, man, with our Wing Chun, if we had that body, we'd be in. I'm like, you know, I don't know about that. I wouldn't murder someone just because I had a body like that, right? But it was kind of funny because you think about it.
It'd be so easy to murder someone with that.
But you think about it, you know, you look at someone like that and you think, like, why is this guy so worried about self-defense, right? Yeah. And then one of the things that I've learned in all my years of teaching is that occasionally these really big dudes, they're super fearful because they're so big, no one ever picked a fight with them, and they never actually learned how to fight.
Never had
so they're actually really worried that someone who actually knows something is going to punk them because their large size notwithstanding, they really don't have anything else, right?
Wow.
So anyway, but I see this guy and I'm thinking like, I still don't think he's a scared dude, right? Because I'm thinking the dude's like big. Maybe he just really wants to know if this stuff is real, right?
Okay.
So, you know, I demonstrate some stuff with Carlos. I have Carlos attack me. I demonstrate some punch defense, kick defense, things like that. And then I go up to him and I'm going to start to show him how to chain punch, right? Yeah. And like I remember like I'm kind of looking up at him to kind of correct his arms, right?
High tower.
Yeah, and I start kind of guiding his hands like for the chain punching, right? And then I'm going to show him like, okay, when I punch you, like I want you to send your hands forward. I want you to do this. And I throw like a baby punch at him because, he's, kid gloves. He's here for an intro lesson. I don't want to scare the guy, right? And I start going like this, and he goes, and he pulls back. And I'll never forget because he sounded exactly like the cowardly lion from Wizard of Oz. Like that image is burned into my head because I watched that movie so many times as a kid. It was like, that whole thing. And I'm looking at this guy, I'm like, and there's this like cognitive dissonance in my mind where I'm going like, this doesn't compute because his size and the way he's reacting to my 5' nothing ass coming at him, this doesn't make any sense.
Sounds
right?
like young Frankenstein over here.
You know what it is? It's also like in Germany, there were lots of big dudes in Germany that I trained with, and those dudes weren't afraid of anything. So for me, it was just like, what's going on here, right? And then I'm like trying to show him some stuff, and every time I go to like, even just put his arms in the right position, he's like, ugh. Super scared dude, right? And so like, wow. Yeah, I did the lesson and then never heard back from him, right? Like, and there's a follow-up story to that dude though, but I think I'm going to tell that on another episode because that's not a year one story. But let's put a bookmark.
Oh, he comes back
the guy comes
year
back.
Later, 2 years later?
No, about 5 years later, all right? We'll put a bookmark in that guy. Yeah, that'll be on the year 5 episode, right? Yes. Wow. So anyway, and one thing that was interesting though, when I was at the Tai Chi place, at the place on 23rd Street, he also rented to like 1 or 2 other people there, and there was this dude that he used to rent to, and his name was Sifu Martello, and this guy was an expert in a few different Chinese martial arts. I believe. He was an expert in Northern Mantis. He was an expert in Shuai Jiao, like Chinese wrestling.
Shuai Jiao?
Yeah, and a couple, other like internal styles and things like that, right? Yeah. And he taught his class before I taught my Wing Chun class. And I remember I would come into, into the space and wait there for his class to wrap up before I would go in there. And I remember watching this dude. And like, so I would catch the tail end of his lessons. And this dude was good. And I remember it was one of the first times where, because, when you do Wing Chun, you're like, yeah, Wing Chun is an effective style because it has a reputation of, actually fighting on the streets of Hong Kong compared to some of the other forms-based martial arts, which maybe at one point they did know how to fight with them, but maybe nowadays those styles are more about the forms and stuff like that. So even though I was a big Kung Fu fan in general, especially because of the movies, I was pretty dismissive of styles, of non-Wing Chun Kung Fu styles. I just thought it's like a bunch of form stuff and whatever. Like I would be way more interested in looking at boxing and jiu-jitsu than I would at other other Kung Fu forms, right? Gotcha. It was like Wing Chun for me and then everything else, and then Kung Fu stuff was like, But I remember watching this guy, this Sifu Martello, and man, he was good. He would demonstrate stuff and he did footwork that looked very similar to some of our most advanced like Chi Gurk and leg locks and binds and sweeps and trips. He had footwork that like, I remember it in my mind's eye to this day. Very rarely seen people do that kind of technical tripping and sweeping, and he just had a way of moving. And I remember looking at this guy, and in my heart knowing like, damn, this guy's really good.
Where do you think he was from?
Well, I think he was from New York, right? And he had trained with a bunch of different dudes, right? His name was Mike Martello. He sounds like he's from New York, right? But I don't know too much, right? The problem was that, I just spent 3 years training at the castle, and I was like very indoctrinated in like, I'm a Wing Chun, like, when you become an instructor in a martial art, oftentimes, not always, maybe with modern martial arts, a little bit different. That's such a big part of your identity. Yeah. I'm a Wing Chun guy. I teach Wing Chun. And to a certain degree, you almost feel like you have to be like a Wing Chun is the best, F the rest. That's not how I feel now. But I'll tell you what, that's definitely how I felt then. And I remember looking at this guy, and one part of my soul was like, this dude is good. I really like what this guy's doing. And I want to ask him, like, yo, man, what is that you're doing? And maybe, not that I wanted to do his style or anything like that, but I want to know.
Intrigued.
I want to know a little bit about what he does because I respected the guy in a way that if I saw a boxer who was doing some cool boxing stuff, I'd go up to him like, hey, man, how do you do that? Even as a Wing Chun guy. But there was something, because this guy was another Kung Fu guy, that my ego at that time I was like, I can't. You know what I mean? Because you just almost hear Sifu Langting. So I was like, oh, that other Kung Fu is idiotic. And Not that he would have necessarily said that. That actually was not his attitude. But in my mind, that's how I framed everything, right? So I was like, you know, I never like asked him. And he was always very nice. His class would finish. He'd give me like a little bow. And I would be like, you know, I'd give him a little bow and I would start. And then I would, super cool dude, right? But I remember like thinking, damn, this guy's good. And I realized, especially a little bit later, it was my ego, because what I was seeing was someone, I was a junior instructor. I was a good teacher and I was relatively skillful in Wing Chun, but I was not masterful by any stretch of the imagination. And I was very green.
Yeah.
And what I was seeing is I was seeing
Green
someone,
like my shirt.
I was seeing someone who was better at his art than I was at mine. You know? And I just remember just going like, there was something in there was like my ego wouldn't let me go up to him and even just say, hey, man, dude, you're awesome, man. I love what you're doing there. Because there was this thing where it was like, I'd kind of like, you know, kind of hold it in and be like, whatever, you know? And so, you know, the ego was a lifelong project, right?
MF, yeah.
And so I remember, but I would just see him like, you know, I'd come in, day in, like, you know, once a week, he was before me, right? Well, I would see him and I would just be like, man, this dude really knows something, right? And then, like, you know, eventually when I left the Tai Chi place and got my own place, obviously I fell out of contact. I mean, I didn't really have any contact with him, but I later found out that in 2009, he passed away suddenly. Wow. He had like a congenital heart defect, and he passed away like in the middle of teaching a lesson. Wow. And I just remember like someone, it was probably Glenn who ran the Tai Chi school, right? Told me that, right? Yeah. And I just remember like thinking, damn, what a wasted opportunity, man. Because there are very few people where you just see, like, I would get goosebumps looking at a move because you could tell this dude was good. He moved well. He explained things very clearly. He didn't have an ego when he did things. And you just go, this dude is the real deal. And at the time that I crossed paths with him, I was too immature to even just do the one thing that Kung Fu people very rarely can do with each other. Just be like, it's one thing like you can, in modern martial arts, like a jiu-jitsu guy can be like, yo, that kickboxer is awesome. Okay. A kickboxer would be like, yo, that guy's jiu-jitsu is legit. But oftentimes in traditional martial arts, we can't even compliment people within our own line of our style, let alone people in another style, right? And what the hell is so bad with going up to someone who does another traditional martial art or whatever that's nothing like your own and be like, dude, you're really fantastic at what you do. And I really appreciate, like, you're amazing. We don't do that enough. There are people who are just as good as your Sifu is in their own style. Yeah. And there's this weird thing where it's like, we can't even acknowledge that. Like, hey, man, like, what I wouldn't do, man, to go back in time to 2002 and just go up to him, shake his hand like, dude, you're really phenomenal. And you are really someone who's very accomplished in your style. And I, you know, and maybe some part of me, especially since I found out he passed away in 2009, wanted to say, like, you know, you want to be like that guy. The guy who's super low-key, masterful, does his thing. And when you see him move, you go, this guy's got skill. But he's not there. You know what I mean?
He barely
and
talks
so,
about
you know,
skill.
I think about it. It's like, you know, I hope that Sifu Mike Martello, the late Sifu Mike Martello, I hope his students knew how lucky they were, man. Because that dude was legit, man.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, so, you know, that was like kind of like the situation, right?
He inspired you on another level, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so back to my classes at the Tai Chi place, right? So that dude was there, and you know, the Sifu Mike Martello. And then there was a guy there at the Tai Chi school who was probably the polar opposite of Sifu Mike Martello. And the kind of thing, like, you know, for me, this year one stuff was like, I didn't know much about the New York martial arts scene, but I got the crash course. The New York martial arts scene, not like the jiu-jitsu and the boxing, the kickboxing, I mean the traditional, like the Kung Fu scene. There's some really cool cats, like the ones I mentioned before, and there's some weird stuff. There's some weird, like, maladjusted types in the Chinese Kung Fu world, right?
Yeah.
And so there was this dude, and he was, at that time, he was actually, I believe he was living in that Tai Chi space. Because Glenn, he had a little office, right? And so this dude, I believe, was like, he had like a little cot in the office, and he was sleeping there because he didn't have a place to be, right?
Okay.
Because I caught him, like, I came there a couple times, the dude was like
Cotton out.
Yeah, you know. And so his name was Sifu Jai. All right. Now I want you to imagine what this guy looks like. All right. Do you know Chris Kattan from Saturday Night Live? All right. So I want you to imagine Chris Kattan, okay, with a super pretentious Fu Manchu. Okay. Because that's how you know you're a kung fu guy when you got a Fu Manchu, right?
The long mustache with the long
He had a
coat.
Fu Manchu and he had long hair and dirty. So Chris Kattan with a Fu Manchu, long hair and dirty. This is
Imagine
pretty much what this Sifu Jai guy
Chris
looked like,
Kattan
right? But
playing
here's the
this
crazy thing.
character.
He was the dude looked like a bad sketch character, man.
Yeah.
But he was like, this New Yorker. He could speak Cantonese. He had apparently spent some time training in Hong Kong. He practiced a style called Hong Fat. Hong Fat is a hybrid style of Hong Ga and Fat Ga styles together, right? It's like a hybrid Southern Shaolin martial art. But he was also ordained, apparently, by the state of New York as a Taoist priest, okay? And so apparently he could even, I guess he could even marry people or whatever because he was ordained or whatever. But he was also one of these wackadoodle guys who believed in like Taoist magic. Like he took Lam Ching Ying's Mr. Vampire and thought that was, a manual for life or something like that. Like, I mean, he thought he could maybe like shoot laser whammies out of his fingers or something like that, right? So you would talk to this guy a couple times and it would be borderline between him talking about like being a Hong Fat practitioner, which is like an actual legitimate style of Kung Fu. And then he even claimed that he had learned from Quan Tak Heng, one of, the godfather of Chinese Kung Fu movies, which for me, I was always a Quan Tak Heng fan. I was like, wow, Quan Tak Heng, amazing. And then he would go into all this like Taoist alchemy and magic stuff. And you'd be like, all right, you're starting to lose me, bro. Yo. So anyway, but he was kind of a weird dude, right? But anyway, a couple times I had seen him. He would like be squatting or sleeping in the office. And I'm like, who's this like weird Chris Kattan looking kung fu dude, right? And he'd talk to me and he'd be like, oh, I met Sifu Leung back in the day and he was very nice to me and blah, 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 blah. And so like it was relatively cordial. Didn't have any issue with him, right? And then one day, I've never told you this story, man.
I love this.
I've had the energy to tell this story probably 3 times in my life, right? So almost said his real name, Glenn. Glenn, the guy who ran the Tai Chi school. He wanted to have, like in Chinese martial arts schools, you usually have an altar. Like you have, Guan Gong, General Quan, and then, you burn incense and maybe depending on the school or the style, you have different gods there. Maybe you have photos and, you have like an altar for the feng shui, for the spirits or whatever, right? Okay. And these are things as a Kung Fu fan I was super interested in, but as someone who trained Wing Chun for 3 years in Germany, knew nothing about, right? Because there wasn't the Taoist altar. They didn't have a course on Taoist altar preparations in Langenfeld in Germany, right? And of course, Sifu Leung is probably the least superstitious Chinese guy you've ever met, right? And he doesn't believe in any of that stuff anyway. Wow. And so they wanted to have, because, Glenn's school was, relatively new and he wanted to put an altar there. And of course, Sifu Jai had all the altars and all that stuff. So he was going to set up his altar there, put all the different, gods and everything. And then what you're going to do is you're going to, have the opening ceremony where he's going to come in his Taoist priest robes and he's basically going to bless the school, right? So, he's going to come in and have the ceremony and we're all going to be there or whatever. And so I'm like, cool. I think the Sifu Jai guy is a little weird, but the dude speaks Cantonese. He's been around for a while. He's supposedly legitimately a Taoist priest, right? And I'm like, this is the kind of weird New York thing, this like short Jewish guy is, of course, a Taoist priest, It's like, of course, because that's New York,
Plus
right?
you're green.
Yeah, I'm green. I'm like this. I'm all just,
taking it all in.
Look, everything in life is either a learning experience or an earning experience, right? And I was in full learning experience mode at this time, right? So
great.
And my wife at the time, we had just married. She was from Taiwan. And Taiwanese are usually a bit superstitious when it comes to, this kind of stuff. They're very big on like, all the different ceremonies and all this kind of stuff. So she was like super superstitious about all this stuff, right? And she was a bit skeptical about some white dude doing this ceremony, all right? And so like, I was like, yeah, I don't know, but it's New York and you have all sorts of types here, right? And she was like, oh, okay. But she was like really apprehensive because she was very superstitious. And she thought, if something goes wrong, this can be kind of like a bad omen, right? And as a matter of fact, I know this is like a little weird, but she was on her period at that time, and she didn't want to. No, and I'm not saying this for any other reason than this. She was so superstitious. She says in Taiwan, women. This is what she told me. I don't know if this is true. Women who are on their period shouldn't offer incense at this kind of ceremony. So that's how but that's how she was. Wow. She knew about this stuff. So she was like, I'm not going to actually offer incense because of this thing, right? So it wasn't like she had no idea. But she was still super apprehensive, but she came there to support, right?
Okay.
So I was like, okay, we show up. I don't remember who was there. I don't know if a couple of my students were there or it was just me. Glenn was there, and Sifu Jai was going to come in and he had this female Todaya student. And she always walked like 5 feet behind him. Like he would walk and she would follow him. And then he'd take a few more steps and she'd follow him. And it was super weird because it felt a little culty, and it felt a little like, he's like her personal guru, or Sifu in this case. And it was just, I felt it was a little off. And I remember at that time I wasn't a Sifu yet. I was just like a junior instructor. And I was like, note to self, when you finally become a Sifu, don't be like that. You know what I mean? Like, don't get into this weird culty stuff because it looks weird for people.
5 steps behind.
Yeah, it was like super weird, right? But anyway, we're there whatever time on whatever night we met. And Sifu Jai was supposed to be there, I don't know, let's just say 7 p.m. I don't know if that was the time. 7:30 rolls by, he's still not there. We're sitting around. And, my wife at that time, she's like kind of going like, this isn't a good sign. Sifu Jai walks in. And this dude was drunker than Jean-Claude Van Damme when we saw him in Hong Kong.
Oh!
Okay? All right?
Oh!
And you remember, Dre, how drunk he was when we saw him, right? That wasn't light level, all right? Jean-Claude Van Damme was off the rails drunk when we saw him in Chim Sa Choi on that one... on that one night in 2018 in Hong Kong. Night to remember. That's a story for another podcast. Sifu Jai strolls in drunker than Van Damme in Chim Sa Choi, all right? But like stumbling drunk. And his female student is behind him, like literally trying to prop him up. And it's so embarrassing because she's like, oh, Sifu, let me get that for you. Oh, Sifu, let me get that for you. Oh, Sifu. Yeah, she's like, oh, Sifu, oh, Sifu, oh, Sifu. And it's like, how embarrassing. Like, here you are in mixed company and your Sifu is like falling over himself drunk, and you have to be like, oh, let me get that. It's like, oh my God. Like at some point you got to ask yourself some hard questions, So anyway, he's in there and he's like kind of barely able to stand up. Right. And he goes in, he puts his his monk robe, his Taoist robe on. I don't even remember. Maybe he had the funny hat on. I don't remember, right? Some of those details, my memory is like, maybe I've tried to flush a lot of this stuff out of my mind on purpose, right?
Looking straight out of Star Wars Episode 1.
Yeah. His the altar is there. And I remember he brought these little plastic bottles and they had oil in them, like a special type of oil. And he poured the oil into these cups. And then he lit it, and then it would go on for almost like little candles. But I don't remember exactly, but it was like this little oil, and somehow he lit it, and then and that's how he was going to light all the different, let's just call them oil candles, for lack of a better term, on this altar, right? And so while he's there, he just starts like rambling on about a bunch of nonsense, okay? And we don't know what he's talking about. And so he's just like going on and on. And my wife at that time, she's like, this isn't good. This isn't good. He's so drunk. He shouldn't be drunk. This is not the way it's supposed to work. This is a very bad omen for the school. And I'm going like, okay. And then he's stumbling there, right? And he looks at me. And he has this like kind of look on his eye, right? And he goes, I know Leung Tang. And mind you, remember I told you a moment ago, he told me he had met Leung Tang and everything was cool. And he goes, yeah, I don't really think that much of him. I don't know. I don't really think those Wing Chun guys are good at all. And I just remember, because, okay, this is not, all right, this is not 43-year-old, very calm Kung Fu genius that you see before your eyes now. This is 24-year-old me trying to make my name in New York City, and I just turned red. And I'm just like, yo, dude said what? Right? And then I remember I was in my mind, I'm going to deck this dude. I'm not going to Wing Chun punch this guy. I'm going to take my hand from Montana, through Texas, and I'm going to slap him across his face. I don't need Wing Chun to fight a drunk guy. I need Wing Chun to defend myself. This dude is going to get a Texas slap, okay? You know what I mean? And I remember I postured up, and I kind of like was about to walk, and my wife held my hand. And I remember she's looked at me, and she goes, ceremony. Like,
she knew
like this is already bad enough. Don't make it worse. And I just remember at that time, and then Glenn looked at me, and he was like embarrassed, and I'm just like taking a deep breath, right? He keeps rambling on, and he starts lighting some stuff, and he starts, and I'm thinking, is this even real, or did he just watch Encounters of a Spooky Kind with Sammo Hung, right? I mean, is he following Chan Lung, or like he's just following what he saw in some movie, right? And doing all this kind of stuff, right? And then he'll stop and he'll turn around and ramble on about a bunch of nonsense about how he's the only guy who knows these traditions and the new Kung Fu. And he's like, and the new Kung Fu guys nowadays don't know anything about Chinese culture, presuming he's trying to talk about me in the room, like those guys in the locker room. And then meanwhile, while he's doing this, he keeps taking swigs of whatever he brought. Like he's still drinking.
In a random cup.
In a random cup, and he's drinking it, right? And so he's already drunk, and he keeps drinking. I remember then he starts lighting this paper, like the whatever, and then he puts. I remember the incense sticks. They're the thick kind, like that you see in Hong Kong, right?
Damn.
And maybe he was only supposed to put a few. And I remember he put a bunch that was this big, and he put them all in there. And when he lit it, it was so much incense together, it just created this big flame, and like the room was like starting to get filled with smoke, right? Because the incense wasn't burning. The incense was on fire. And I'm just like, and I'm looking at this going like, oh my God, this drunk guy is handling fire. Okay?
Wow.
And like, he's kind of trying to blow it down or whatever, right? And this stuff is like, I mean, the place is turning black, right?
Whoa.
And then, okay? No. And Dre?
No.
If I didn't see it with my own eyes, I would never repeat this story because it's too unbelievable. Okay? He slumps into the chair while his altar is half on fire. He sits down. He continues going on with some kind of rant, and he goes to grab whatever the thing that he's drinking. Okay? Now I'll tell you. Okay? This is some straight out of Tom and Jerry shit right here, okay? All right? He grabbed the bottle of the oil used to make that stuff catch on fire. And he took a swig of it. And but he didn't look, he just grabbed it and went, assuming that it was the alcohol he was Dre, if I didn't see it with my own eyes, I would either think I'm watching something that was hidden camera stuff, or I just wouldn't believe the story at all.
Dude.
He drank it, and his student at that time, I remember, it was almost like in slow motion. She goes, Sifu.
Slow motion.
Trying to get him to stop from drinking that, right?
Grab it.
And while he's grabbing, he drinks it.
No.
And then he realizes what he's doing, and he goes and spits it all over the altar, and the altar just goes in flames. And I'm like, oh man, we had to get the fire extinguisher and put that stuff out. My wife is about to have a heart attack. She's like,
I knew it.
And then it was so crazy. And then we left that night, and then she was looking at me. She's like, that school is doomed. That school is doomed.
Wow.
You know?
Wow.
And it was that was crazy, right? That was, and of course, that didn't exactly raise my opinion of Mr. Sifu Jai at all, right? And so, and of course, the funny thing is, he's like most Kung Fu Sifu, or many Kung Fu Sifus in New York, right? The reason why these guys never establish themselves is because they're all trying to be actors. He was trying to be in movies and trying to do things. They all, Kung Fu Katan. None of these guys just want to do the work and run a school. Everyone wants to be a movie star. Everyone wants to be in movies. It's so embarrassing, man. Sometimes people ask me, oh, how were you able to, develop my school, how was I able to develop my school in New York City? I go, easy. I'm one of the few Sifus who's not trying to be in the movies and failing. I just did my thing.
Just
the only thing I know how to do,
Yeah.
right? I'm not trying to, the world is not, banging down the doors to see Sifu Alex Richter in, Death Warrant 8, okay? And I'm aware of this, okay? I don't know, maybe you are, I don't know. Okay, maybe I would want to see that movie, all right? But only because it's the 8th one. I mean, the previous 7 stories didn't quite fulfill it, right? So anyway.
I got to see that movie now.
So after all this, I'm just like, oh man, this is crazy. This is not good, right? And then it was just a few weeks after that. I go to the Tai Chi school.
Time out. This is all year one.
This is all year one. No, this is, dude, we're like within the first 6 months here, man. All right? Okay. This is like, you have no idea, man. I got stories for days, man. This was crazy. And you have to imagine, the juxtaposition of, I spent 3 years living in Germany, training martial arts 6 hours a day, studying martial arts, just being about this. And now I'm going to teach it. And now I'm in this just wacky, weird world of Taoist priests lighting stuff on fire, Wing Chun students in the locker room telling me no one can find their Sifu center, people sending me death threats on a weekly basis. And it's like, and this is like within 6 months. It's like, welcome to New York.
Welcome.
All right? You are not prepared for any of this stuff at all.
You didn't see any of this coming. Yeah.
A few weeks later, I go to the, to the Tai Chi place to start teaching my class, and Glenn is there. And he goes, I got some bad news. And then I'm like, what? And he goes, I haven't been paying my rent for like the last 8 months. And I also didn't pay my Con Ed bill. They're about to shut everything down. So we got to get out of here.
Ouch.
And remember how I told you about the flyers?
This is like,
I had the flyers printed with that address on there.
Yeah.
The next day after hearing that news, the flyers came in. I had like 1,000 flyers, postcard flyers with that address on it.
Timing is everything, baby.
Timing is everything.
Wow.
And I was like, what? He didn't pay his rent.
Wow.
And I was like, I just could not. And I was like, this is unbelievable. This is unbelievable.
8 months he didn't pay his rent.
Yeah. Pretty much the whole time he was in that space. When he signed the lease and just flip his middle finger off at the landlord? How does that work? Right?
Wow.
Yeah. And also, he didn't also pay his Con Ed either. Like, they're about to shut down the power in here. And I was like, oh, man.
This is
unbelievable,
brutal.
right?
That's rough.
So basically, I was like, all right. This is a sign. I got to do my own thing.
I got to get my own space.
Because it was kind of my plan, rent from a dance studio a couple times a week, maybe get in a semi-permanent location, like a shared space, and then eventually get my own space. I just didn't realize I was going to have to do this all in the span of 7 months. Because, having no startup capital, like, it's not like, I didn't have like investors behind me or anything like that. I didn't have any money, like people giving me, there was no like City Wing Chun trust fund, right? Yeah, exactly, right? I didn't have that. So, and dude, this is Manhattan, okay? Yeah. You want to rent a commercial space in Manhattan? So I was like, oh man. So I did what everyone else did at that time. I got the Village Voice and I started looking for spaces. And I looked at dingy stuff in the Lower East Side, but then I would look at like these spaces down like in Soho, because I had no idea. But they'd be like on the 8th floor of an old building. Yeah. Not that big.
Pre-war, yeah.
I would look at it and I'd be like, yeah, I think this will work. Great. Yeah, the rent's $18,000. And I'd be like, damn. Yeah, and we need first month, last month, and a deposit to get in there. It's like, yeah, I'm going to keep looking. All right. And then I kept looking, and eventually I found the space that would be my first school, which is not this space. It was right around the corner on 39th. So I was there for a year. And then, we'll talk about this on another one. But I was there for a year, but I was above a yoga school. And the yoga school complained that I made too much noise. But the landlord liked me because I paid my rent on time every month. So then the landlord ran this space and then said, we can't renew your lease there because the yoga place, they had a bigger space. They were paying more. So they had a little more pull. So then they moved me here. And then I've been here ever since.
Year one.
No, this is after. That's why I said, well, I'll talk about it. I'll talk about it. Yeah, yeah. But I'm just saying, so like, when I first got that space, it wasn't this space, it was that space over there, right? Okay. So, but that was crazy because at that time, dude, I didn't even have credit at that time. I didn't even have a credit card. I had to have my mom come in and co-sign for me on the lease, right? Because it was so crazy, right? But that space I got for a really cheap rate because it was a loft space, 4th floor, no elevator, walk up, not too big. And I was able to, like, with the students I have, just pay rent, And, man, I was eating ketchup sandwiches.
Eating bitter.
Eating bitter and, like, doing everything I could to pay that rent. But, like, I was, like, at least.
You say ketchup sandwiches?
Ketchup sandwiches, man. No, I'm not even joking, man. I would just 2 slices of bread and ketchup. All right?
Ketchup sandwiches.
And I would eat that. And that would be, like, what I would sustain myself with. And to make sure that I had rent to pay for my school. Because at that point, I was never going to put the fate of me or my students in someone else's hands again. I was very lucky that I learned that lesson very early on. You cannot rely on other people that way. You have to do it yourself. And so I learned it. It was a little bit bitter. And then I took those 1,000 postcards and I had to make, those label makers. And then I put the new address on there and I had to cover. I had to cover each of those on both sides because I printed the address on both sides, of course, right? And so it was like,
has one of those flyers.
I don't think anyone out there is going to have. I might have one back at home, though. I might have a photo of it or something like that, right?
I love to see this.
Yeah, no, it was total dog shit. It was total dog shit. And so, so I got, I had my school then and, was starting to move some things in there. Still getting death threats from, or I should say challenge people. They were going to show up to my school with a camera and beat me up next week from the William Chun guys. All right. And then, 2 weeks later, next week we're coming and we're going to show up and blah, 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 blah. And and so that was like the perennial thing. And then at some point I'm like, oh, okay. All right.
Did they ever show up?
No, they didn't. It reminds me a little. You ever see the movie Princess Bride? Yeah, where he, Wesley gets kidnapped by the Dread Pirate Roberts, and the Dread Pirate Roberts, every morning tells him, I'll probably kill you today, and then but ends up not doing it. So at some point it was something like that. All right, you're gonna show up to my school and kill me next week. All right, maybe they'll show up next week. I don't know.
Keep you on your toes.
But anyway, the other, so that was kind of like the first half of that year, and then the second half of that year teaching, I had my own space. Great. I started to get more students and I could decorate the space and get my own equipment. And I didn't have any starting capital. So when I had like a couple extra bucks, I got 2 kick shields. Then I had a couple extra bucks. I got another wall bag on the wall, right? I had a couple extra bucks. I bought a poster and put it or something like that, right? So I built my school incrementally as I kind of grew it, right? I never I didn't go in there and like have the whole thing renovated and ready to go. I like kind of, it
like
was
everyone else does.
Yeah, it was pretty much an open space. I just had the photo of, Grandmaster Yip Man and Sifu Jai and my Sifu and like the Siunum Tao poster. And then I got a wooden dummy and then I got a wall bag and then, and then some other stuff, right?
How long did it take to get that wooden dummy?
I got that pretty much right away. That was one of the first things I bought.
Yeah.
And very early on, I met a guy named John Ficarra who taught stage combat, which is basically how to teach actors how to fight on stage.
Oh, stunt shit.
Yeah, but specifically also for theater. So, like they're doing Shakespeare and they have a knife fight, how to sell it, but still the actors are safe. And then he contacted me and he wanted a place to teach his stage combat things, right? Ooh. And that's eventually, how I kind of got that connection. And John Ficarra is the guy who made the City Wing Chun logo. Because I didn't even have a logo. At that time, I was just like the New York branch of Leung Ting Wing Chun. Yeah. And he's like, yo, bro, you need a logo. And I'm like, really? I need a logo for my business? He's like, yeah. And then so he made the original City Wing Chun logo, which was multicolored. Now we've since updated it. It's a monochrome. It's one color. Yeah. And we tilted it. But it used to be like perfectly vertical, right?
Yep.
But John Ficarra made the first City Wing Chun logo. I'll always be super.
It was a vertical logo.
Yeah, I'll always be super, super thankful to him for that. And I'm still good friends with John Ficarra. And yeah, it's a great friend, fantastic ally. And yeah. So anyway, in addition to that, and by the way, I believe my David Carradine story happened in year 1. But I'm going to tell that story on another podcast, right? Because otherwise, this is too much, right? The last thing I want to talk about, kind of like the year 1 stuff, was, I had this weird first half of the year where I'm teaching at dance studios and dealing with weird Taoist priests and egoistic Wing Chun people and blah, 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 blah. and then eventually
Catan.
get my own space. And then, once I got my own space, I was kind of to a certain degree shielded from all the weird, because when I was teaching at Dance Studios or Chow's Martial Arts Center, I would teach my class and they'd be like Wing Chun people outside looking in, vibing me. And it was very weird. You know what I mean? And now, okay, I had my own school. So I felt once I had my own place, I was really able to start growing because it just felt like the weirdness of the vibe that those guys had. It was like, I do this because I like it. And these guys seem to do it, but they seem to somehow hate it because they just want to make it look ugly and feel ugly all the time, right? And so in that second half of the year, that's when I actually had my first seminars with Sifu Jai and started to kind of meet the other WT people who are teaching in the US. And the first instructor seminar Sifu Jai taught was within that first year I taught in New York, but it was in Boston. So I went over to Boston and I met some of the Boston instructors. And at that time, Sifu Jeff Webb, and at that time he was super helpful to me. And I also met some instructors from other WT instructors, and that's when I learned.
Nameless.
Yeah, they shall remain nameless. That's when I realized, it's like a different vibe because look, we do a traditional martial art. And, there's a certain protocol. Your Sifu is your Sifu. Your Qigong is your Qigong. And I like these things. I think it's not about, being subservient or anything like that. It's about really having a Kung Fu family style. And if someone is your Siheng, they start with, hey, you call them Siheng. These things are actually nice because they imply a closeness. These are not military titles. These are familial titles, right? And so I understood that. I mean, even though I learned in Germany, I was still very into the traditional Chinese culture. But I realized very quickly on in the States, because WT, specifically the Lengting lineage, wasn't as developed as it was in Germany. They were so few and far between here in the States. So that meant that you had like maybe one WT school in that state, and then there's not another WT school until 3 states over, right? But in Germany, you had multiple schools in one city. I mean, I think there was a point when Berlin alone had like 17 EWTO schools. So to give you kind of like, there probably weren't even 17 WT schools in all of US. And there was one just in one town in one city in Germany, right? Just to give you some perspective. But you know what this bred? Because they were so few and far between, these guys were like, I'm the WT guy of, Pennsylvania. You know what I mean? Because, it's one thing, if you're a WT guy in Berlin and there's 16 other WT schools, you're part of a family and you're one of many. When you're like one of 17 guys in all of US, you are, I am seeing so-and-so. And these guys were so big on that kind of hierarchy in a way that I believe in it. But for them, that was their identity. For me, it was like, if I'm your Siheng, you call me Siheng. If I'm your Sizok, you call me Sizok. That I don't have any, it's not my decision what you are in the Kung Fu family. But for them, most of their identity as a Wing Chun practitioner was in whether they were someone's Siheng or not. And that was kind of very jarring for me because in Germany, it was always about like, how good you were and what you knew, you know what I mean? And how much you trained and what you were able to do. And so I go to Boston and I meet this Chinese first level technician who was not from the Boston area. He was from somewhere else. And he goes up to me and goes, oh, you must be that Alex guy from the castle, right? And I'm like, yeah, okay. Like, but it was a little weird, right? And he goes, hi, I'm, and he introduced his name and he goes, when did you start Wing Chun? And I go, well, probably officially started, I don't know, maybe tail end of 98, middle of 98. He goes, oh, I started at the beginning of 98, so I'm your Siheng.
Yo.
But it was like, which is funny because had I not known if he was my Siheng or not, I always call people Siheng if I don't know or not. And then you can get corrected later. Oh, actually, I started before you. Oh, okay, all right, fine. Always defer to the side of being overly polite. But it was this kind of thing like, and I remember the thing that was jarring is he said that, he said that before he gave me his hand. It was like, this needs to be clarified first. Wow. Okay? And the irony is, and this is not to be self-aggrandizing or promote myself or whatever. Not 10 minutes later, Sifu Jai took us in Chisao and he was doing the chasing program. The 周一鸣对应 program, right? Where you pull and do all this kind of stuff, right? And we trained that a lot in Germany. And so I knew about, and I had actually done it with him once in Germany before, so I knew how he liked to do it. And he grabbed me, and, he's offering me and pulling me and mixing in the non-Wing Chun attacks with the first Chisao program. He goes, very good. You have the reflex action, all right? And I was like, oh, thank you. And then he takes this Chinese guy, my Siheng, and he kept stepping in with the wrong leg, and Sifu Liang get so angry, right? No. And then he would give him the indoor paksao, and he had no bong wu reaction, and he would pull him, and he wouldn't even know to step. And this guy was a primary level technician. And then he goes, oh, this is no good. You should train with Alex. He has the reflex action, and he can help you. And I just remember going like, oh, on one hand, it's kind of funny, but on the other hand, it's also putting a target on my back, right? You know? And so, but I remember that because it was so jarring, because it was like, oh, these guys here in the States, and that guy's Sifu, and the other high-ranking Sifus in the U.S., nearly every time I ever saw them at a seminar, their big thing was who started 1 month before them, before the other 40 years ago. Like, they were still having an argument over who the scene was, and I'm like, this is the stuff that people are so concerned with over here? Not the fact that they've been doing Wing Chun for 40 years and they look like they've been doing it for 40 minutes. All right? But you know, it's like if I had been doing Wing Chun for so long and I was that poorly skilled and had that much of a weird attitude about what my title was, I wouldn't want to admit that I'd been doing it for that long. It's kind of, but they say it with no irony as to how bad they are, admitting how long they've done it, right? And this was the weird culture over here, right? And I was like, this is super weird. So anyway, that was the Boston experience. And then kind of a little bit past 1 year of my first year there, I remember it was like a little later in the year, I went to a seminar out in Bellingham, Washington, out on the West Coast.
Okay.
And then I met another type of weird American Wing Chun instructor. And he was one of the few guys who actually had a commercial school. And we'll just call him Brian. That's not his name either. But Brian actually had an actual school, like industrial location, nice size. He also taught kickboxing and Wing Chun. He had a very professional school. And from a business perspective, he was one of the few guys who, like, he knew way more than me at that time in terms of business acumen, right? But the thing was, he was a little culty and a little weird. He was one of these guys who's super hardcore into NLP. Do you know NLP? Neuro-linguistic programming.
Yes.
And neuro-linguistic programming is kind of like one of those things that I believe that in recent years, a lot of it has been debunked as being a bit kind of pseudoscience or whatever. But I'm one way or another, I don't care. I'm not here to litigate or relitigate if NLP is a real thing or not, right? But anyway, he was one, and I've read books on NLP 20 years ago, right? And it's, you know, some of the stuff is very innocuous. It's like, you know, if you want to make someone feel comfortable when you talk to them, you do what's called mirroring. So if you have your hands on your hips, I put my hands on my hips.
Okay.
If you like to talk this way, or you like to put your hands here, like I do something so that at a subconscious level, if you see that I move in a similar way to you, you're going to feel more at ease. Like if you're kind of shrunken back and I'm talking like this here, I'm probably going to make you feel a little uncomfortable. But if I kind of match your intensity and maybe some of your mannerisms without straight imitating you, then that's called mirroring, right? And there's some things about eye contact and how you shake hands and how you talk and the type of language you use. And some of the NLP stuff is like improving yourself. Some of the NLP stuff is like having a good relationship with other people. And some of it is kind of like manipulative.
Okay.
And the funny thing is I knew that this guy who taught this school, this Brian guy, was a big NLP guy because someone else had told me, like, oh yeah, that dude's totally an NLP. And there's not the worst.
He's totally an NLP.
He's totally an NLP, right? Yeah. And the thing is, when you've read about NLP, the funniest thing about it is to see someone apply it very poorly because you know what they're trying to do. And he was one of these guys. He was one of these guys that, like, when you met him, he gave you this like eye contact and he shook your hand in this kind of way where it's like, I am like he's trying to like vibe into your head like, I am the alpha male in this exchange. And I will have very eerie and awkward eye contact with you until you submit to the fact that I'm the alpha male. You know what I mean? And it's like one, you see the techniques he's doing, so it doesn't work. You know, it's like Kung Fu choreography. When you see its choreography, it doesn't work. And NLP, when you see it, what?
You're watching this third, like, over here, and he's interacting with someone.
No, I'm interacting with him, and I'm seeing, like, I'm seeing his techniques. I'm like, oh, he's trying this. Oh, he's trying this, right?
You don't need to see his identification.
Yes, exactly. He's trying the Jedi mind trick on me, right? And so, like, you know.
Yo, this is great.
Well, it was weird because I'm going like, man, what a weird WT scene there is in the U.S.
Yeah.
You have you don't really have professional schools. You have small clubs with a handful of students. You had a couple people who actually had a brick and mortar school, like Sifu Jeff Webb, couple people, very few people, right? And then like here's one guy who actually has a school, and he's creepy weird. And his students are all kind of like, they'll remind me a little bit of like the Heaven's Gate cult. You know, they're all a little bit like...
Wait, what's the Heaven's Gate again?
Those are the ones that thought the flying saucer was going to come down, and they all committed suicide, and they wore the sneakers and everything, and, you know, all the dudes were castrated or whatever, you know. Yeah, it's a great documentary on HBO about that. But they all kind of like look like this. And his students all gave me that, and it was like really weird. And like he was very controlling. Like at that time, you had these things called the Wing Chun passports, which was like for the association gave you a Wing Chun passport, and it would have a record of all your student levels. Well, normally that was, you know, you joined the association and you got your Wing Chun passport, and every time you pass a level, a qualified Sifu would sign it in there, right? But he held the Wing Chun passports of his students. They couldn't even hold on to it. And like in every other school, you had your own Wing Chun passport. So when you went to another seminar, you had to actually bring your Wing Chun passport to show that you were like a legit member of the association or whatever, right? And so it was normal. Like I had mine. I brought my American Wing Chun passport to Germany. And when I passed all my levels, they signed off and I passed away. You have this like record of what you know. So you can go to a seminar, show the Sifu, hey, look, I'm legit and I really learned these things, right? He held on to his students' Wing Chun passports.
Like the government holding on to your passport.
Yeah, but it was like weird because he wasn't authorized to sign in them, but he would hold on to them presumably so they wouldn't be able to visit other Wing Chun schools. I don't know what the reason is, but it was like he had his own little weird cult within WT. Oh, and it was just like, wow. and I remember other people telling me about this guy, and like he's like got the creepy weird NLP, which is so obvious and so poorly done, and he comes off as like he's very stiff and wooden, and like then you hear that he holds the passports of his students, presumably so they can't even train in other WT schools, and it was just weird. And I remember going back to New York and going like, what
just happened?
I don't understand like who these people are, you know, like they have the opportunity to learn from Sifu Leung Ting and they're all weird.
Wackadoodle.
Right? And mind you, I came from learning Kung Fu in Germany. Yeah. And I'm coming back to the States and I'm going, these dudes are weird. You know, and just going like, I'm gonna have to do things my own way a little bit, like, because I don't want to be like any of these examples that I'm seeing here, you know? Oh. And so anyway, that's more or less what happened in the first year. And I think this is probably a good place to stop before I put my foot in my mouth.
Man, wait, is this guy still around? NLP guy?
I don't know. I lost track of him. I think we were friends on Facebook, and then I said something on Facebook that made him very upset, and then he blocked me or whatever.
He blocked you?
Yeah, he blocked me. It's fine. Side note about that guy. Before I went to Germany, all right? Remember I told you I was learning in Seattle in that school that was run by those students, right?
With him in Germany,
right?
No.
Randomly? Yes. So he was a first level technician, okay? And when I was like a student level nothing, and I went to one of Sifu Imin's seminars in the Seattle area, at the official school?
Wait, he's in Bellingham.
He's in Bellingham, Washington. So he drove down and he brought some of his students to that Sifu Imin seminar. So I was like a white shirt nobody, and I saw him there. He was a first level technician. And I remember that we even I trained a couple exercises with him or whatever, right? And then, you know, flash forward now some 4 years later, I had gone to Germany. I became a first level technician. I came back to the States. Now I'm in his school for a Sifu Leung Ting seminar. And I was training with him because Sifu Leung Ting was teaching us the Buji Chisao. And Sifu Leung Ting was teaching him Buji 1. And I was learning Buji 1 at the same time as him. And he was a primary level 4 years earlier when I was a 0, right? And I remember I was training with him at the seminar, and he looked at me and he goes, "You look familiar." And I go, "Yeah, I met you 4 years ago at Sifu Imin seminar when I was student level 0. Yes. And then he goes, "Oh." And I go, "Yeah." And then I went to Germany and trained at Castle, and yeah, now I'm here. And then it was like, he had not, I mean, look, it's not his fault whether he had not advanced or not. I'm not saying like, oh, I caught up to him and that makes me better. But it was this kind of like this weird thing, like, you know, outside of this little weird cult thing you've created, people are training their asses off and they're catching up. You know what I mean? And that seminar, you know, the weird NLP dude notwithstanding, that was the seminar where Sifu Leung Ting gave me my Chinese name, Wai Tao. because we went to a sushi restaurant and then he gave me my Chinese name
wow.
and then he drew it on the napkin, which I put
Yeah.
in my first book. That was in Bellingham at that seminar that I went to. And then so that's when I first got my Chinese name. And so that was a cool trip all around. And then I started learning the Buji Chi from Sifu Jai back then. But it was just weird in terms of like, man, most of the people I've met who teach Wing Chun in the States, they're not like normal dudes. The dudes I trained with in Germany, they were like normal dudes who liked Wing Chun. And we could like hang out and they were like dudes and people. And with few exceptions, nearly every WT person I met in the US was like a pod person. Like their true brain had been snatched from an alien and replaced with pod people. It was just bizarre. And I was just thinking like, man, this is a weird... I really love Wing Chun because I'm sticking around.
What a mind
But these
fuck.
dudes are weird.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was pretty much my year one. So I don't know.
Loved
If
it.
people like this episode, I'll talk more about it. I'm really not big about talking about this stuff. I'll talk more castle stories. But the stuff in
Yeah.
the States is weird, man. I mean, I don't know. Most of these dudes were weird.
It's still a learning experience for someone that wants to open their own branch and stuff like that.
Yes, take a look at everything I did and do the opposite. Okay? Take that as a guide to do the exact opposite of everything I did at that time. All right?
Yeah.
Flash forward to the stuff where I started doing it the right way. All right, man. Well, that was fun. So what did you think of my year one stories about teaching Wing Chun here in New York City? Do you like this stuff? Would you rather me talk about castle stuff? Do you want more New York stuff? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.
Word is I'm a kung fu genius. Technique speaks for me, not lineage. Forget Jet Li, cause I'm the one. Many call me Sifu, but to you I'm Kung, and I produce masters. You surpassed us, your kung fu stiffer than corpse and caskets. City Wing Chun is the house I built. Violate the gate and your blood gets spilt. Alex Richter, always the...
Lots of East Coast, lots of nonsense, lots of Taoist magic.
Lots of Taoist magic. Yeah.
Sorry, the other thing that would also work really nice is if you were speaking into your microphone.
Oh, yeah.
My bad.
Not sure.
Lots of East Coast. That's not the West. East Bay. All right, lots of nonsense. I love nonsense. All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be discussing his first year in NYC. Okay?
Teaching in NYC.
Damn! Not his first year living in NYC. It's like when you're about to do it and you just feel a nice sensation. My bad. All right, peeps. On today's episode of the Kung Fu Genius, the genius will be discussing his first year teaching in NYC. Lots of...
Jesus Christ.
Stop!
Wow!
This is probably the easiest one I've ever written for you.
I know.
And that's why
It doesn't get easy.
No, it doesn't. It does get easy.
Eighth take Jake.
Eighth take Jake. That would be an improvement. This guy was the eighth take Jake.
Wow.
What an improvement. Yeah. It's the easiest one I've written.
Wow. Yeah, there's
Every week it's fewer and fewer words. He's like, all right, peeps, let's get to it. Jesus Christ. Do you want to learn neuro-linguistic programming? I can teach you. I know all the techniques. That guy was such a tool.